Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm doing a character study of Beatrice Horseman. She's the daughter of Joseph and Honey Sugarman, younger sister of Crackerjack Sugarman, wife to Butterscotch Horseman, and mother to BoJack Horseman, and she's voiced by Wendy Malick. Beatrice is an extremely interesting character because she starts off in the series completely unsympathetic, with nothing likable or redeemable about her whatsoever. And it isn't until season 4, when we learn more about her backstory and her upbringing, that she does become more sympathetic. But she's introduced in the second episode of season 1, BoJack Hates the Troops, where we meet his parents in a flashback of his childhood.
What was your childhood like?
Normal.
Normal?
Yeah, it was normal childhood stuff.
Here's your omelet. I'm sorry it's not as good as the omelets your secretary makes, but then you're not married to your secretary, are you?
Well, maybe if my secretary also refused to get an abortion, I would be.
Mommy, can I have an omelet?
You're the birthday boy.
Normal childhood, and then just get right into the being famous part.
And it's so devastating knowing BoJack grew up in this completely loveless household, where neither of his parents showed him any love and affection at all, and they were always fighting with each other, and Beatrice, in particular, being this extremely bitter, resentful person. A line that always stood out to me is when she says, "You're the birthday boy," because that's so unbelievably cold and harsh, first of all. But also it shows that, at best, she sees BoJack as nothing more than an obligation, and really he's just this burden to her. And she puts all the blame on him and takes her anger out on him. And Butterscotch, in turn, being so hateful, with the two of them always fighting, and how we see throughout the course of the show that he had multiple extramarital affairs, and yet Beatrice never left him. So what's interesting about Beatrice, something Raphael Bob Waxberg has said regarding her character, is that we are all heroes of our own lives. So when it came to Beatrice, he said that it wasn't so much finding a way to make her more vulnerable as it was discovering why she is the way she is, what made her become this extremely bitter, resentful person. And in the season 2 premiere, Brand New Couch, there's another flashback where by then that was when BoJack was in his heyday of horsing around, and Beatrice had gone to a taping.
It wasn't Ibsen.
That's your takeaway? That your son's TV show wasn't Ibsen?
I'm sorry. Did you need a compliment? Oh, I love the part where you got your head caught in the banister.
Yeah.
Oh, and what's this letter I have? It's from the government saying, "I'm proud of you."
Are you?
Oh, no. No, actually what I'm holding is nothing.
Excuse me, can you check on our drinks? I would love some gin right now.
I wouldn't drink anything out of an open container. This town is full of AIDS.
Well, that's not accurate.
You're a clown. You know that?
And you've always been a wonderful pillar of support. Gin, please? Is there gin coming?
No, I'm here, aren't I? I suffered through that ordeal. You know, the man sitting next to me was wearing a t-shirt, BoJack, in the theater.
Yes, a t-shirt. That is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone in a theater.
The t-shirt told me to just do it.
Here we go.
I don't know to what the t-shirt referred, but I will not be spoken to in that tone by an article of clothing.
Vodka, triple sec, looking for any alcohol.
You don't know how lucky you are to have me. I hope you die before I do, so you never have to know what it's like to lose a mother.
Well, as long as one of us dies, that's good enough for me. Can we please get some alcohol into my mouth?
First of all, it's hilarious when she says, "A t-shirt, BoJack, in the theater," and he says, "Yes, that is the worst thing to ever happen in a theater." And of course, he's referring to the assassination of Lincoln from John Wilkes Booth. But what's interesting is that she says, "Well, it was no Ibsen," and that's something BoJack says in the very first scene of the show, so evidently he got that from her. And of course, they're referring to Henrik Ibsen, who was a playwright. He wrote many, many plays. I've read a couple of them, which I've mentioned. I've read Hedda Gabler and A Doll's House. So what she's saying, though, is that, well, this is no high art. And then she goes on to, ridicule him and mock him. It's like, "Oh, I'm proud of you. Actually, what I'm holding is nothing." And then she's like, "Well, I'm here, aren't I?" So again, it's like, well, I showed up, so that's as much as I'm going to do. But I'm not going to show you any respect, because why should I show you any respect when I don't? She just doesn't respect what he does. He can't get any slightest bit of encouragement from her, any slightest bit of like, well, I am proud of you, even though I don't care for this show, but just none of that at all. And then, of course, just leads to his outburst of, can we please get some alcohol into my mouth? But then also in that episode, at the end of that episode, because that's when he had started working on Secretariat, his dream movie, we see for the first time Beatrice in present day, and now she's an elderly woman, and she calls BoJack, saying that she read his book, and then she gives this really chilling, heartbreaking speech.
What do you want, Mom?
Look who finally decided to pick up the phone.
Do you need more blood?
I don't need blood. I read your book, BoJack.
Oh.
It takes a real narcissist to think anyone wants to buy a book about him. You know how I feel about Anne Frank.
That was a diary.
I read the parts about me, the things I said to you. You must think I'm a real monster.
Mom.
I don't want to fight you, BoJack. I just wanted to tell you, I know you want to be happy, but you won't be, and I'm sorry.
What?
It's not just you, you know. Your father and I, you come by it honestly, the ugliness inside you. You were born broken. That's your birthright. And now you can fill your life with projects, your books and your movies and your little girlfriends, but it won't make you whole. You're BoJack Horseman. There's no cure for that. Anyway, do you remember who directed the Philadelphia story? 5 letters, second letter U.
Lubitsch?
No, BoJack. Goodbye.
And this is as close to an apology as she gives, though she's not apologizing for her own behavior, like, I'm sorry I wasn't nicer to you, I'm sorry I was so hard on you growing up. Like, even, like, anything as slight as that. All she says is, I'm sorry, it's not just you, like, you were born into this, and then saying you're broken, no matter what you do, you're BoJack Horseman, there's no cure for that. And then what's interesting, too, though, is that after that whole speech, like, no matter what you do, this is who you are, no matter what. And then what's interesting, though, is then when she's, like, asks him to help her with her crossword puzzle, and then he gives the wrong answer, and she's like, no, BoJack, goodbye. And it's just so crazy because even in something as simple as that, it's like he can't be of use to her. No matter what he does, he can't please her. That she'll never show any motherly pride towards him at all. Another really downright devastating flashback of his childhood is later in season 2, the episode The Shot, when he's trying to get that special scene in the movie with Kelsey Jennings, and she prompts him saying, like, this is the part where Secretariat stops running. And then she says he has to cry, but then he says he doesn't cry in front of people. And then she's like, okay, we got it, you didn't have to cry. And then afterwards, though, we see a flashback, and this is why he doesn't ever cry.
What the hell are you doing?
Sorry, Mommy.
Don't you dare put that out. That is a perfectly good cigarette, and you are going to finish it.
But I don't want...
And I don't want to be the mother of a quitter. Finish it. Oh, Jesus Christ, you can't even smoke a cigarette right. Don't you dare cry. Don't you ever cry. You wanted this.
Are you punishing me for smoking or for stealing?
I'm punishing you for being alive.
Just that line when she says, I'm punishing you for being alive. Absolutely terrible. That he didn't ask to be born, and yet she just can't be bothered with him. Like, this is what you get for being alive. So terrible. Forcing him to smoke. Like, oh my God, absolutely crushing. And then also, at the end of that episode, when he goes out to smoke a cigarette, then he's by himself, and he just breaks down crying as if, like, he'd been wanting to, like, it had been building up for him. So it's just so absolutely devastating again. So then by season 4, that's really the big arc for Beatrice. So we finally learn about what her childhood was like in the second episode of that season, the Old Sugarman Place. And that one's so brilliantly done with the flashbacks of her childhood weaving in and out of the present with BoJack when he meets that fly Eddie, and he's at their summer home in Michigan, and he's trying to he's rebuilding it. And we learn about her parents, Honey and Joseph. And Joseph in particular is this real monster, how he just imposes all of these things on her, like her womanly behavior, and saying, oh, that he thinks he knows everything about what a woman's place should be in the world. And the really heartbreaking thing, she has like her doll, and we learn then that her older brother Crackerjack was killed in World War II. And that's when her mother, who is so lively and full of love and everything, that's when she just takes a turn, and she's just driven mad with grief and puts Beatrice's life in danger when they crash the car and all of that. And that's when then the father deciding for her she's going to get a lobotomy. So then he goes to talk to Beatrice.
Is Mother okay?
She is now. She just let her womanly emotions get the better of her, that's all. Nothing a little operation couldn't fix.
Operation?
What's broken in the heart can never be repaired, but the brain, well, we have all sorts of science for the brain. She's a brand new woman now, and she'd like to meet you very much.
Mother?
Oh, hello.
It's Beatrice.
Yes, that's right. What a pretty girl.
What did they do to you?
Oh, hush. It's okay. I'm better now.
I don't understand.
Love does things to a person. Terrible things. Beatrice, promise me you'll never love anyone as much as I loved Crackerjack.
I promise. I won't.
Why, I have half a mind.
I remember the first time watching that episode, and then, well, I have half a mind, and how chilling that was. Oh my god, because it's a callback to earlier in the episode, like, oh, I have a half a mind to kiss you with that mouth. He's like, oh, well, that's the half you can keep. Oh my god. He's so evil. He has that calm voice. He's voiced by Matthew Broderick, and Honey is voiced by Jane Krakowski, and Crackerjack is voiced by Lin-Manuel Miranda. But anyway, the really heartbreaking points, like the catalyst for why Beatrice is the way she is, really it all was because of Crackerjack's untimely, tragic death, and then what Honey says to her. Beatrice, promise me you'll never love anyone as much as I loved Crackerjack. And then she just says, I won't, I promise. And then she takes that promise to heart. We never see her love anyone at all, including herself. She's just this cold person with no vulnerability whatsoever. And that's part of why she tells BoJack, too, in that other flashback, don't cry, don't you ever cry. Like, just showing no emotion whatsoever, just bottling it all up. Because then what her father had said, too, like, oh, don't show your womanly emotions. You don't want to end up like your mother, do you? Which that's in Time's Arrow. So then also throughout that season, in the present, then we learn she has dementia. Then she goes to live with BoJack. Afterwards, when BoJack and Hollyhock had gone to visit her. And then that's when he finds out that she is actually a fan of horsing around then when she's at the nursing home. It's like, oh, she gets just joy out of that. And then he's like, oh, we're going to put on this show. And then when she recognizes me, then he's going to tell her to F off. And then obviously that doesn't work out. But then also when she first sees him, she doesn't recognize him. She calls him Henrietta. And then, of course, as we later learn, Henrietta was their household maid. Then also we see throughout this season when she is giving Hollyhock coffee, and then it turns out she had been drugging it with this mixture that basically makes you lose weight, because it's something she herself growing up, she would have what she called it, or her father called it, like pretty pills, like to make her lose weight, and it's just like so disgusting, all of that. And then also a big moment in that season is when she has like a baby doll, and then like BoJack throws it over the edge and she screams. Then he has to go get the doll back, and then he's just like jealous of the doll. It's like, oh, look how mom treats doll. It's like, what did doll ever do? It's just really interesting because it's kind of a glimpse of the kind of mother she could have been, like loving and doting towards this doll, which then we learn about with her doll from her childhood that she like loved and cared for so much. But then it gets thrown into the fire because afterwards when she gets scarlet fever, which is all in Time's Arrow, that brilliant episode. But also, the first time she sees Hollyhock, she says, oh, you look just like him. So she has that moment of recognition. And on first watch, we think she's talking about BoJack because we are led to believe that Hollyhock is BoJack's biological daughter. But then, spoiler alert, we find out that, in fact, Butterscotch is Hollyhock's biological father, making Hollyhock and BoJack half-siblings. So then, Time's Arrow, absolutely brilliant episode. What makes it so amazing is that it's told through Beatrice's memories, and then faces are blurred out, and then things appear and disappear because it's all in her memories where she's losing her memory tragically because she has dementia. But it's just so compelling with the visuals and then the story itself of Beatrice's childhood growing up and then when she meets Butterscotch. The thing with Beatrice is that as she gets older, she is really smart. We see her reading, but then her father is always discouraging that. He just wants to marry her off. And then he just says, like, oh, you're going to go with this guy, Corbin Creamerman. And then she's saying, well, I don't want that. He's just saying, I don't give a damn what you want. And it's just so terrible. But then at the debutante ball, when she's supposed to do that, then that's when she meets Butterscotch Horseman. So then she's attracted to, like, oh, this rebellious guy, and he's trying to write this great American novel. And so then they run off together, they sleep together, and that's when she gets pregnant with BoJack. And as the episode jumps around, in her childhood too, when we see she develops scarlet fever, and then everything has to be burned, so that's when her father takes her doll and throws it into the fire. So that is this trauma for her. So then in present day, when BoJack throws that doll over the edge, then she screams with like terror in her eyes. And the only time we ever see anything of kindness with Beatrice, with Henrietta, Butterscotch walks in saying she got herself pregnant. She's like, oh, she got herself pregnant. And then he's saying, please, Bea, I know you hate me, but just talk to her, because he basically wants her to convince Henrietta to have an abortion. So the scene when she talks to Henrietta, and Henrietta is crying and everything, and Beatrice just standing firm.
You're fired, of course.
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Horseman. He was just so kind to me, and I felt so...
Let me guess. He said you reminded him of his dead mother.
He said she had hair like mine. He saw it in a picture once.
Do you really want this child?
I think so. It's a baby horse. I'm a girl. I need help. I'm studying to be a nurse, and tuition keeps going up.
None of that is my fault.
If I can just finish school and get a job, it'll be okay.
And who's going to care for the baby while you work? Because God knows he won't. Well, don't do that. What does that solve?
I don't know what else to do, Mrs. Horseman.
All right. We'll pay for your tuition.
Really?
Yes. And you'll give the baby up for adoption.
No.
You think you want this, but you don't. Not like this.
Mrs. Horseman.
Don't throw away your dreams for this child. Don't let that man poison your life the way he did mine. You are going to finish your schooling and become a nurse. You'll meet a man, a good man, and you'll have a family. But please believe me, you don't want this. Please, Henrietta. You have to believe me. Please, don't do what I did.
Because the line in particular, you think you want this, but you don't. Don't, like, throw away your dreams the way I did. So it's basically her saying to give her a real chance of doing what she wants, saying, we'll pay for your schooling so you can become a nurse, but don't throw all your dreams away for this child. And it's basically her giving her the chance that she herself didn't have. So really that's the most sincere act of kindness we see from Beatrice in the entire series, I will say. And then also the juxtaposition then of when Beatrice had given birth, we see a baby BoJack, and then when Henrietta gives birth and we see a baby Hollyhock. That's so brilliant and touching as well. Also incredible too and interesting is that Henrietta's face is all scribbled on because she holds anger towards her, obviously. And yet still, even with all that, with her sleeping with her husband, and yet she still has the moment of understanding and putting her ego aside and just allowing her to do that. And then also when she takes the baby, though, saying, no, you'll get attached, and that's it, when they place Hollyhock for adoption. And the absolutely beautiful moment in that episode is at the end, back in present day, when BoJack puts Beatrice in a home, and then he gives her that moment of calmness and peace. Just a truly beautiful moment that always makes me choked up every time I've seen it.
Best of luck. See ya never.
Who is that?
Ugh. Bye, Mom.
BoJack?
Mom?
But BoJack? Is that you?
Yeah, it's me.
What is this place?
This is where you live now.
No. Is it? No.
Mom.
Where are we, BoJack?
I just told you.
I don't understand. Where am I?
You're... in Michigan.
Michigan?
Yeah, at the lake house.
I am?
And it's a warm summer night, and the fireflies are dancing in the sky, and your whole family is here, and they're telling you that everything is going to be all right.
Yes, that's right. What else?
The crickets are chirping, and the lake is still, and the night is full of stars.
I can see it. It's so clear. What are we doing here, BoJack?
We're sitting on the back porch, and we're listening to your brother play the piano, and we're eating ice cream. Vanilla ice cream.
Yes, that's right. Oh, it's all so marvelous.
Can you taste the ice cream, Mom?
Oh, BoJack, it's so delicious.
Where he allows her that indulgence in her memory instead of what he had wanted to do earlier in the season, saying he was going to tell her off. Instead, he allows her to go back to this happy place in her memories and to taste ice cream, because she never was able to eat ice cream because that was only for boys, and she only ever had lemon with sugar on it because, again, this was from her father, so that was always so devastating and cruel. And so instead she has this moment because of BoJack of, oh, BoJack, it's delicious. Something she never really truly got to enjoy. And it's all the more meaningful because it's one of the most selfless things BoJack himself has done throughout the show. Instead of in her moment of lucidity telling her off, instead doing the complete opposite of just doing this really kind, simple thing for her. And it's all the more meaningful because us as the audience, having seen all of those flashbacks and memories of Beatrice's life throughout her childhood and then growing up and afterwards having BoJack and then her deteriorating marriage and everything, with all of that, so then it's all the more impactful and meaningful. So it's a really beautiful moment, one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. And then there's the absolutely brilliant standout episode of season 5, and of the whole show for that matter, Free Churro, one of the best of the series, where BoJack delivers Beatrice's eulogy, and he tries to make sense of her final words to him, I see you, and he thinks maybe she meant it in a literal way, I simply see you sitting there, or in a sinister way, like I see you for who you really are, or just in a genuine, compassionate way for once, where BoJack, I see you. But then he tragically realizes she was simply reading the letters ICU, the intensive care unit. And then it's so devastating when he says, my mother is dead and everything is worse now, because now I'll never have a mother who looks at me from across the room and says, BoJack, I see you. And there's another great point throughout that speech when he talks about how the only saving grace, like when she ever seemed truly happy, was at her supper parties, and she'd put on these great shows. Not even his dad would come out of his office and watch her dance. And then he says how we were all drowning, me, my mom, and my dad, and that we couldn't save each other, but we understood each other.
You know, the first time I ever performed in front of an audience actually was with my mom. She used to put on these shows with her supper club in the living room, and she used to make me sing the Lollipop song. Those parties, they were really something. There were skits and magic acts and ethnically insensitive vaudeville routines, and the big finale was always a dance my mother did. She had this beautiful dress that she only brought out for these parties, and she did this incredible number. It was so beautiful and sad. Dad hated the parties. He'd lock himself in the study and bang on the walls for us to keep it down. But he always came out to see Mom dance. He'd linger in the doorway, scotch in hand, and watch in awe as this cynical, despicable woman he married took flight. And as a child who was completely terrified of both my parents, I was always aware that this moment of grace, it meant something. We understood each other in a way. Me and my mom and my dad. As screwed up as we all were, we did understand each other. My mother, she knew what it's like to feel your entire life like you're drowning, with the exception of these moments. These very rare, brief instances in which you suddenly remember you can swim. But then again, mostly not. Mostly you're drowning. She understood that too. And she recognized that I understood it. And Dad, all three of us were drowning and we didn't know how to save each other. But there was an understanding that we were all drowning together. And I would like to think that that's what she meant when we were in the hospital and she said, I see you.
Oh my God, amazing episode. And just BoJack really coming to terms with the fact that this was the mother he had. These were his parents, and the most he ever got was that tiny grain of understanding that this is who we are, and we recognize that we're all fighting our own heartbreaking battles, and yet we can't help each other. And then the last appearance of Beatrice in the entire series, another absolutely brilliant episode, most people's favorite episode, hands down. It's definitely my top 5. The View from Halfway Down, the penultimate episode of the series. Oh my God, that episode is so incredible. I recently rewatched it, so it was my second time overall watching it. I picked up on new things here and there, and it's just so brilliant. By the end, I was crying, I will say. The first time watching it, I didn't cry until the end of the final episode of the series, but this time I just broke down by the end because that final sequence, it's incredible. But I'm going on a tangent, pardon me. But with Beatrice in particular, it's just interesting. Another layer to this episode to think about is that since this is BoJack's dream, that this is, in a sense, really just his interpretation of everyone. So although it's true to all of them, and everything, like who they are, or who he knew them as anyway. That's just interesting to think about in that sense with what they say to each other, in particular with him and his father. Since just to mention his dad, what his dad says when he's Secretariat, but it's his dad speaking, and then he says when they're out on the bridge smoking, because that bridge that Secretariat had jumped off of when he committed suicide, Butterscotch says, I cared so much, BoJack. I wanted you to respect me. And it's just really interesting. It's one of those things, I've mentioned this before when I talked about the final season, but it's one of those things where, did he really feel that way, or was this just what BoJack wanted to hear? And it makes sense that this could be what he really thought deep down, but then what a way of showing it, being so hateful and yet taking his anger out on BoJack as well. Because even in Free Churro, at the beginning of that episode, it's just a flashback of his dad picking him up from soccer practice and saying, oh, I'm supposed to be working on my craft and yet I gotta pick you up. And then, oh, well, thank you. Like when he just says all this cruel stuff. So then in this fever dream, in The View from Halfway Down, when he just says, I did care about you, BoJack. But BoJack says, no, you didn't care. You just cared about your book and all of that. So just interesting to think about. But with Beatrice in particular, when he brings her the hydrangea, and then she's like, oh, well, you're the guest of honor. And then he's like, oh, here, for you, the plant. She says, oh, dirt in the house. Goody. Like, even something as simple as that. She's so unimpressed and bothered by it. And then also when she tells him to, like, help them get the bird out, the bird that had flown in. And that bird is so interesting, too. It's just this red bird. I thought of it as, like, a red herring, like a literal red herring, you know? But who knows? But then when he does actually get the bird out, and you hear the horsing around music, and she's like, oh, great. Like, she doesn't even complimented him on that, even though she told him to get, like, be useful for once, get the bird out of the house. And then she's like, oh yeah, like, you're just making a mess, you're just like a clown, whatever she says. Again, unimpressed, and again, just critical as always. And then when they're at dinner, and then she's still being critical of him, saying, oh, well, that just benefited you, when they talk about the highs and lows of their lives. And then he's saying, oh, well, I guess that I helped a student, it made me feel good. And she's saying, oh, just it made you feel good. That's the best moment in your entire life. Always so sarcastic and just still consistent with her character, with the way she treated him throughout her entire life. But then when they go to the performance hall, they each do their final performances before going into that dark abyss in the door. And she does her ribbon routine, and she's wearing her dress, like her in her highest point. And then she's saying, this is the hard part, and now the easy part. And then she just disappears.
Here is Beatrice Horseman with her younger older brother, Cracker Jack!
This is the hard part.
Golly.
And now, the easy part.
Over and out. Ha!
And so that's her final bowing out, her final moment where she herself having her time to shine. And one other moment just to point out, though, was in the season 6 premiere, Horace walks into a rehab when, at the end of that episode, when we see, like, the first time he tried alcohol, his parents are both passed out, and he tries a sip of alcohol, and then the young BoJack just curls up next to his mother, because he always just wanted that, and he just never got that from her at all. We never saw anything at all from her throughout the show that she cared. That's just how she came to be. So overall, Beatrice, too, throughout her childhood, someone to genuinely sympathize with, and then we see her turning point with, after the death of her brother, and then her mother telling her to never love anyone the same way she did with her brother. And so that's why she became the cold, bitter person she is. So is she someone to sympathize with? Is she someone to hate? I don't think she's someone to hate anymore. At first I did. At first she seemed like just a villain in the series. But then with season 4, we see that's why she is. So Beatrice, too, though she did horrible things, though she was cruel and mean towards everyone, despite the one act of grace towards Henrietta, that in and of itself, perhaps it is something to admire. So rest in peace, Beatrice Horseman. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. As always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Send me a question, comment, or writing prompt in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or send me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I'm so excited to welcome Sylvie back to the podcast. If you recall, Sylvie joined me last year in episode 52 when we discussed Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling. This time, she and I are going to be discussing all things fan fiction. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.